Wow, that's a lot to pack in. You know, I think of my music as sort of, it's become an extension of myself, more than sort of any sort of cultural, it doesn't really have a cultural attachment to it. So I think of my music as sort of a exploration to understand myself and my family. And so a lot of times my music is about identity, but it's not really tied to a specific cultural, location or have you. It is about my personal experience. It's about my personal feelings. And because of that specificity, I think it also becomes universal because it's so specific to me. And I hope that my journey is also resonates with other people. And so it's, for me, it's about the human sentiment and the human condition more than it is about tracing the cultural backgrounds or being faithful to that. I guess, I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, and as a byproduct, of course, I would have certain influences. Gamelan has been a huge influence because of the fact that I joined a Balinese gamelan for many years, and I have an affinity to Southeast Asia. Recently, I've begun an oral history of my family's journey, trying to escape they did escape the Khmer Rouge back in 1975, the year I was born. And I composed some opera scenes around that, as well as a percussion piece, and I'm hoping to enlarge that into a bigger full-length opera. So all these things sort of shape who I am and also my music. And I kind of tend to borrow from all of these things and assimilate that into my own voice. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I consider myself a late bloomer, even though, on paper, it seems like, I had a pretty early sprouting, but I consider myself a late bloomer because of the fact that took me a long time for me to figure out all these things about where I fit in, just even in the realm of concert music. All this training that I had, I got this traditional French sort of training with counterpoint and all that, all the craft that you need to traditionally become a composer. And then you ask yourself, what do you do with that? And it took me a long time to figure out my voice in the midst of all these other things that I was trained to do. And it took me a long time because I had to unlearn a lot of things that I learned. And I think also what's difficult about my upbringing and my situation is that I'm not really tied to, I'm being born in Canada and really going through my schooling in the United States. There's a neutrality about the cultural upbringing, right? So, if you were born in China, there are certain things that you come into culturally that is very strong, but here, it can be a lot of different things, and sort of this in-betweenness of neither being here nor there it threw me off a lot, and to come to terms with that took me a long time. And I think it resonates with a lot of people that, immigrant families, not just, Chinese American, what have you, but a lot of immigrant families whose children were born here and they associate with their family, but they don't necessarily associate with the cultural background of that family, from the original place that they were born. So there's a lot of in-betweenness, and to figure that out is very tricky, in fact. And so for me personally, it took me a long time. Yeah, I know. That's the thing that I think was most difficult for me. I mean, growing up, I grew up in Canada, and I was, I can remember in my elementary school, I was routinely called a chink, and I was like, it was, uh, it was discrimination and just a lack of awareness of where I came from and what that meant. And then, when I was in college, I didn't really have, I mean, I had mentors and I'm grateful for my mentors, but I didn't really have someone I could talk to about all these issues that, um, have become so important to me, like identity and like gender, and also building a life around being a composer, not just writing music, but all the things that you have to do as human, having a family, uh, building a life around it. And so when it comes to me giving back now that I'm in my 40s, I find it really important to talk about these things. And I love to do that as part of mentoring the next generation of composers. I don't see myself as particularly, one thing or another. I just compose, right? And what comes out. But I think, of course, it's a nature nurture type of thing. Of course, your environment influences your being and your music. And I think a lot of the differences between Canada, the US are socioeconomic, as far as the political infrastructure, each of the countries, they're very, very different. And that leads to differences in cultural tendencies, right? And so I would say that it's neither good or bad or better or worse, it's just very different. One thing I've noticed is, in Canada, being a Commonwealth country, there is an affinity to, more of the French or British influences. That there is that sort of tradition that is that Canadians are proud of, especially in Quebec with the tradition of the French. But I think, those generalizations are, again, it's their generalizations. But I do think that, with the infrastructure of Canada having the support of the government, that makes a huge difference as far as, what gets programmed and what content there is there versus here. I lived in New York for almost 30 years, and you had the concentration of musicians there and the life, which is really rich. And New York is known for being a hub of cultural activity. On the West Coast, in the Bay Area, things are a lot more spread out. So, you have a lot of activity going on, but you not necessarily get to know about it because of the geographic spread. I think there's still a wealth of new music being written and being cultivated. It's just being spread out over this huge geographic area. So it can be a little bit trickier just because of that. But I think, being here for, a number of years, I've also gotten to know fabulous musicians to collaborate with. So I guess, for me, I have the best of all worlds because, having lived on the East Coast, I still connect with, my friends on the East Coast, and the West Coast, and making new friends here. And then being Canadian, I always have that, to go back to, and I still work with a lot of the groups up there. So I have all this trifecta of different groups that I get to work with, which is great. Ooh, I think process is a really good word. I really love talking about process when I talk about composition, because the end result is almost like a byproduct. When I teach, I really like to talk about the process and how things tend to work. I think that once I get into the process of composing, it almost takes over for me. I can't really describe, the technical details, but I can describe the feeling I get. If I go into that flow of working and composing, and actually deadlines are really helpful to me. Like knowing that there is an end game, my adrenaline kicks in and I kind of go into the zone of making, and doing. And it almost becomes like a spiritual process to me, because there is a higher power for me that takes over, so to speak. I mean, not really, but I feel like there is something guiding me, and that guidance is in the form of intuition, maybe, or years of doing this, what have you. But it takes over. That sort of intuition takes over, and it almost guides me to choose my notes and to choose what I need to do. That being said, of course, years of craft and years of doing this has certainly helped. And I also think of architecture as a very important role into crafting the whole piece, so that it has to have an inherent flow and inherent logic to it. But process for me is really important, and that idea of this, I don't know, this letting that force take over. It sounds really cheesy, I know, but blank pages are the toughest, because it's like an abyss. You stare into it and you feel so unproductive because you're staring at the blank page. But I have come to the conclusion that the first draft will be always terrible, so, and I've always accepted, I've come to accept that whatever you do will be, the first draft will always be a work in progress. And so I give myself permission to just start, and with the acceptance that you will always have to change and tweak and mold it to your liking. And so the start is always, it's become like almost like a ritual, because it's like the idea of starting is so difficult, staring at a blank page. That's probably the most difficult. The end, coming to the end where, things are becoming, finishing, and things are becoming concrete, and everything is just working itself out. That's easy, but the beginning is so difficult. So not to sound prodigious or anything, because I don't think I was, but so I started, I had a tiger mom on piano when I was like 4 or 5, and being the obedient child that I was, I started with that. But then composition came because I didn't want to practice, and I actually think that a lot of composers have the same story. So I was like maybe 7 or 8, and my mom was saying, go practice, and I didn't want to practice, so I would start improvising on the piano so that she would know that I was practicing, even though I wasn't. I was fortunate that my first piano teacher was a composer, and I still am really good friends with her. In fact, she came to Cambodia with us, with our son. She recognized that, and she, instead of reprimanding me, saying, you shouldn't do that or whatever, she actually taught me how to notate. And she said, oh, wouldn't it be fun to write some of these things down instead of just having it be improvisations. And so that's when my imagination really became, I found an outlet. And so my first, composition where I notated it was a group of piano pieces called Insect Songs. And it's not just insect songs, it's insect songs, And, of course, the music was very simple with, Alberti basses and all those things, but the stories were really elaborate. And so I think my creative outlet became, I grew up in Edmonton where there's nothing to do during the winter time. And when it came time to, college and things, it was just, it chose me almost, Well, I have a son now who's 6, and this is gonna date me, but I had my son when I was 40, so I was talk about late bloomer. For a long time, I didn't want to have children because of the quote that you just read. But things change. You meet a partner, and your priorities start to shift. And I have to say, motherhood. And this is, I like to talk about it because it's still very much taboo, has been a burgeoning of creativity for me because you're no longer focused on me, it's not about me and it's not about it's about, making the world a better place for your child, for your children. And that really puts a different perspective on everything, and it puts a different lens on everything, and it becomes so nurturing, and that you're not just nurturing one person, you're nurturing this community, right? And because it does take a village, and it also makes you think about your impression, your influence on other people. And so composition is a means for me to do that, I think, and it's beautiful because a lot of the compositions that I've done subsequent to that has been through the eyes of my child. I've composed a piece called, it was just performed with the London Symphony, A Child's Dream of Toys, and it's about the journey, and it's all fast music, so I think since having my child, actually my creativity and my output has actually really increased, and I compose more quickly and with bursts of energy that I've found that I didn't even know that I had before, so it's been really quite wonderful for me. Not to say that everything is wonderful about having children, and I wouldn't say, to have children just because you want to be creative, right? But that's a different thing. But I think that for me, it's just it's the opposite of what I was led to believe. That once you have children, that's the end. For me, it was really a beginning of another chapter. I think, it took me a long time to figure out things and where I fit in and my voice and all that. And I think I go back to what I was saying before, to trust your intuition. So, beginning composition students, or even if you're not beginning composition students, you'll get a lot of advice about things, and you'll have a lot of courses and other sort. And I think the thing is to return back to is to always trust your instincts about what is right or where you fit in or how to find your voice. Is to just really listen to that inner voice that will really guide you through to what you want to do, whether it be composition or otherwise. And I think that is really important. That has sustained me through really hard times, and also been integral for me to make certain key decisions about life and about things. And you know, even as fundamental as having a child, if I listened to all my mentors, then I wouldn't have a child, right? And it's really important to cultivate that inner voice, that inner strength, and that inner that force that will hold you together. That's really important. Yeah, I have lots of projects that are brewing. I think I counted like something like 7 or 8 projects this year. And I do want to mention that, this idea of cultivating my oral history with my family, and I've composed these opera scenes. It's called Grover and Friends and Alarm, and it's really about my cousins and my family and their journey, escaping the oppression of the Khmer Rouge, and coming to a new country and all the trauma that's associated with that. So I would love to cultivate that into a full-length opera in the near future. And I'm working with a fabulous librettist on that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think all the other projects are really cool too. And I don't know if we have time for me to mention everything, but I'm working on, I just finished my 5th string quartet, and then I'm working on a piece for 2 pianos and 2 percussion for a group in Philadelphia called Network for New Music, and then another orchestral piece for River Oaks Chamber Orchestra down in Texas, and then in Canada, a flute concerto with the Vancouver Symphony. So all over the place. And then, of course, our project together. So yeah, lots of wonderful things.